Good morning, everybody. Hello, I'm Anita Finley, your Zoomer Times TV host, and I have another very, very special author. I'm in love with my authors. I would like to almost give up doing anything else but just read, and because I choose authors who are different. No matter who they are different, whether they're novelists or they're biographers or someone like Charles Bloch. He wrote a book, and I'm going to show you. We featured it in our magazine called Humanism. And it's just extraordinary. I told him that when I first picked it up, I said, I have to review this because it is what would I say? It picks, according to Charles Bloch, who is so well educated and has been in the world of, well, what would I say? He's been, of course, he's worked in the computer world and all, but he's really an intellectual. We don't often get people who are so intellectual writing our books and that we're reviewing, but we were very fortunate for this one. It's called Humanism: The What, Who, Why, When, and Where. A lot of topics to cover, Charles. So why don't you tell us, I know you've been well educated and all sorts of things in the world, and you are now, I think do you mind if I tell people that you are 90?
No, I don't mind. No, I'm proud of it. It's a great accomplishment.
I feel the same way. Right. Okay. And you're still alive, well, kicking and seeing what else you can do, right?
Thank God, right.
Right. Okay, so why don't you tell us a little bit about your background as you see it? You know, a lot of people, I know when I watch interviews, they have an interviewer who discusses them, but I like the person who's being interviewed to talk about what's been important for them in their life. So how did it all start when you were a little boy? Were you very smart, or were you a problem kid, or what?
I thought I was just slightly above average. I didn't think I was the smartest kid in the class. I worked hard, though. I think stamina is very important. Basic intelligence is needed, but unless you apply yourself very hard. I was always good at working at whatever I was doing, and I set the standard high. I wanted to be better than what I was, but I was not naturally gifted in any way. I never felt that.
And then
that's how it went.
And then it led you. What kind of a family relationship did you have?
I had, well,
your family.
In some ways, it was ideal. Uncles and aunts and father and mother, but my mother died just before my bar mitzvah, and that ruined me. I was in a fog for maybe the next 10 years. I functioned, but I don't think I functioned well. However, I finally came out of it and found a beautiful woman, got married, had children, and led a very, very normal life. I was lucky to be in on computers before there were commercial products. They were toys in the academic world. And we never thought they would become so popular. They were big and cumbersome, but I got to know about them, and then suddenly they became commercially available, and people like me were rare. So I lucked in, and I built my career, at least starting with computers, because there weren't many of us around who knew. But I eventually got into management in a major bank and broadened my horizons, and that's what helped me grow.
Right. So you went in different directions, but at least you brought with you a lot of the education. And let me just stop a minute and ask you about the whole computer world. This whole global economy, everything that's all based on computers. I mean, actually, I wish there were days I didn't have to turn my computer on. It's just too much almost.
It is. When we get older, these new things are harder for us. My grandchildren are better than I am, but at one time I was an expert. But the technology changes and grows. But the thing that excites me is that I think it's a force for humanism. I think if everyone in the world had an iPhone, it'll be hard to keep people down on the farm. It'll be hard for dictators to dominate. So having communication worldwide the way we have, I think, is a force for humanism.
Huh, that's very well said. I agree with you. Yeah, so social media does have its, really great benefits, even though you have to, it does have to be a time where you have to, I think, walk away from some of this, even if it's a few hours, and just look outside, look at the water, look at the trees, look at different things. And I believe this pandemic has done that for us. It's caused us now to take a little bit of a back seat, hasn't it?
There was always an impression, even years ago, to take time out to smell the flowers. And we didn't. I worked very hard. I got home late and I got up early. And my wife went all to these PTA meetings, and I wasn't as attendant a father as I could have been. But work is very demanding, as you know. And when it comes along, you just can't say no, and it helps support everything. But it is good to smell the flowers and get away.
Okay, so now that we got through that, I just want to tell everybody, this is it says on the back, one of the testimonials, Charles Bloch's humanism is an exploration of the causes of the great material progress of the world over the last 300 years. He finds them within ideas rooted in antiquity, which slowly and then rapidly transformed our world. A timely reminder of the importance of ideas in the shaping of our present and future. That was very powerful. That was written by Reverend Robert Serlin, right?
Yeah.
Roman Catholic.
I don't know him, but I contacted him. I contacted a lot of people to endorse my book, and you get a lot of no's, but Reverend Sirocco said yes, and he endorsed the book, and I was very pleased. Along with another chap who was a professor here in Florida, the university, Lynn University in Boca Raton.
Yes.
So those are two very nice.
I got my master's of gerontology there, but I want to go through some of the terrific things. And that was my question before. I think I asked you, of all the famous people, you chose certain people. What did that? What was the basic underlying reason that, for instance, we all know that Gandhi was very important, and we all know that, some of the people that you chose, they were, everyone knew them, but I didn't know Mary Wollstonecraft. Wollstonecraft, is that it? How did you find these people?
She lived at the time of the American and French Revolution. When the French Revolution occurred, a number of intellectuals wrote a book, The Declaration of the Rights of Man. They never mentioned women once, and it really got her angry because she was hopeful with the French Revolution that women would get some rights. Mary Wollstonecraft was the first woman I know of fame who really worked hard for women's rights. She was there 50 or 40 years before the suffragette movement started, and she wanted a lot more than voting rights. She wanted all the privileges that males have in terms of education and jobs. And she was ridiculed because most intelligent men of her time viewed her as ridiculous. And they would use arguments like, women are inferior. Have you seen a woman write an opera? Have you seen a great woman write a play? And she would say, give us the chance. We'll do that. She said, we're held back. You don't give us, it couldn't get into colleges. So, but she was vilified. But she was an amazing woman, had a lot of stamina. The sad part of her life is she died young on her second childbirth. She died. But she left a legacy of a lot of writing, and she impressed a lot of very aware men at the time who helped her. And as a byproduct, it's sort of it's a little bit humorous, but also very nice. Her daughter wrote Frankenstein. Her
No
daughter
kidding.
was Mary Shelley, who married the poet Shelley and wrote the book Frankenstein. Yeah, she died. They never knew each other, but she had a famous daughter.
That is, see
But she
now,
was a very powerful, wonderful woman. Yeah,
right.
in her
I wish,
personal life, it wasn't just she was publicly a humanist. She was a humanist in her personal life. So she impressed
well,
me.
that
And then
is really lovely.
a lot.
Well, now you also chose some, of course, the one person I just loved when you chose George Washington, because I've not been a historian. And of course, I know George Washington and I've been watching things about him, but boy, did I love him after you wrote about him. You made him into the perfect man of today.
He was. Chernow wrote the biography. He said a lot of legends sprung up after Washington died, but you didn't have to sanitize Washington. He was a good man and he didn't need legends. You just had to look at his life. And he was an amazing guy. And we were so lucky. The American Revolution was marked by a lot of good luck because we defeated the biggest empire in the world, which was totally unlikely. So I was proud of him. And others were.
But wait, before you get off of him, before you get off of him a minute, I want to tell you what I loved about him was that as much as he was very valued for his accomplishments and being a leader, he couldn't wait to get home to his wife. I mean, I love that. And that was, you talked about that he couldn't wait. And then they had to keep drawing him back, but he wanted to go home and be with his wife and his family. That made me so happy.
That was wonderful. He was one of those rare people in history that power did not corrupt, and he didn't even seek it. He was happy to vacate power and go home. And he was good at it. He was good as a businessman. He was good at managing Mount Vernon, and he experimented with crops, and he did a lot of innovative things on his own in the management of his properties. So he was a competent man.
Yeah, you chose you chose people now. Some of them I still didn't know. I know the name Spinoza, but I didn't really know about him till I read your book. Why did you choose him?
It's because he was so amazing on so many levels. He was one of the few people that everyone hated, whether the Jewish religion excommunicated him, the Catholics and Protestants were afraid of him. He would write books. He was not an atheist, but his beliefs in God was unconventional, and it scared the others because he was convincing. People sought him out. Dissidents all over Europe sought him out and went to meet him. And he was humble, and he didn't get angry or miserable over his fate, but he was a lonely man. And yet he lived a virtuous life. And so I was very pleased. Also, it's interesting that I think as I was reading Spinoza's ideas, I could see the ideas of the American Revolution bubbled up from him. And I'm sure, and I know for sure that Jefferson had Spinoza in his library along with John Locke. And John Locke had read all of Spinoza. So I think Spinoza was interesting because he had a big influence indirectly on the American Revolution. So I just fell in love with the guy, and he had a hard life, and he died at 46. But he left a lasting impression that is not, I don't know, fully appreciated today by people. So I included him.
Yeah, you had to do a lot of research to get into all these people, and I'm sure you had lists, and then you crossed them off of who you were going to do. Okay, on a scale of 1 to 10, he's a 5. This is an 8. How long did it take you from the conception of this book until you produced it?
I would guess maybe 3 years. About 3 years. Conception is not the right word. I wasn't conceived as a book, it was conceived as a research project. I give myself projects to
Oh,
talking to myself. But
oh.
sometimes a project ends up as a book, and this one did. But it was about 3 years.
I'm sure that you are on, and if not, you should be. You're on the speakers tour because you're an excellent speaker and you know so much, and people are just sit in awe of you. I'm sure. Do you there in your condo? Do you make speeches or do you make them in club meetings or somewhere?
I I will as soon as the COVID virus is over. I hope to talk to book clubs and to libraries and to various condos that invite the guest speakers. Yeah, I have a list of places I will contact, but right now they're not active at
No,
all.
no, I
Even my own
know.
people and I would like to speak to various adult education groups. And you're right, I have spoken a lot during my career.
Yeah.
As I was sort of a management consultant within the bank, and I had to talk to the leaders of the bank and present ideas and convince them of.
Yeah, I can see that. But now you have something much bigger. Banking's okay, but this is for me much bigger. I love what you've done here. You know that as soon as I read this book, I just had to, me too, I just had to have this book to review. It was so special. So I want to ask you about, I did not know anything about Johannes, is it Reichlen? How about
Okay,
this
oh
guy?
yeah, that's what like I can't see. Is it Reichlen?
Yeah,
Is,
talk about him. I didn't know about him. It says that it was 1455 to 1522. Can't even picture that time. That when we talk about, we just had an author talked about 2040 that the cyborgs are going to be more popular, and that's not as long as when we think about 1455 to 1522. That really makes the difference. He says, here it says, Johannes Reichlen was a celebrated Christian scholar in the 15th century. He taught at universities and published many works. By age 37, his reputation was well established in the royal courts and academic circles of his day. And so he was born in 1455. He died at 67. I was talking a little bit while we were trying to get you back. I was
yes.
talking a little bit about Johannes Reichlen, and tell us why
He's
you chose him.
amazing.
Are we getting you now?
He was a man.
Well, we're still having a little problem. He says, and I'll just read something from his book. I know my enemies have been vexed because I said the Jews are our fellow citizens. Now I want them to rage even more in anger because I am saying that the Jews are our brothers. So, here it is. I just have to say that Charles Bloch really chose extraordinary people. And I don't know, Dan, if you ever heard of him. I hadn't heard of him before this, but you look at these people and they suffered a lot because religion was so important. And if you didn't do what the religious norm was, you were an outcast. But yet people who were philosophers had to do what they felt, right?
That's very true.
Yeah, because it says here in this, it says he repeatedly cited the Jewish philosopher Maimonides. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it as the Maimonides as the most magnificent theological authority on things, mental topics, and the nature of God and the relationship of the soul to God. So all these things are very are very deep. I'll say that. And Charles Bloch is very, very smart. And so he was able to get into a lot of this.
Yeah,
He,
it appears to be a true passion of his, isn't it?
yeah, exactly. And now I'll show you, here's a picture of another person. This is Giovanni Pico della Mirandola. And that was 1463 to 1494. Look at this guy. I mean, he's very attractive.
Isn't that something?
Right. And let me see what, so it says here about him that he said, it is granted to have whatever he chooses, to be whatever he wills. That's what his philosophy was. So Giovanni, known as Pico to his friends, was the most modern and humanistic philosopher of the Italian Renaissance. But sadly, he died at the age of 31. We're just, we're doing well. This goes on and off, Charles. I'm ad-libbing. I'm ad-libbing. So it's okay. So as you come on.
I'm on now. Okay, we're talking about Reichlen. And did
We're
you want to talk
talking
about
now.
him or what?
Okay, I talked about a few people, but let's talk about Pico. Pico.
Oh, Pico.
Giovanni.
Yeah, Giovanni Pico. He lived
Yeah.
in the late 1400s. He was totally a prodigy. I mean, they all were very bright people, but he could speak 7 or 8 languages, including Hebrew, Aramaic, and Arabic. And he studied the Bible in the original. But what he's famous for is he wrote a book called The Dignity of Man. And it was perhaps the first great humanistic text ever written. And it was obvious that he knew his Hebrew. He could quote from Jeremiah and Proverbs. And in his book, he does cite these people. And I was so excited by the book. It made an impact in his time and after his time. And I said, gee, I'd like to, the answer to both was yes. And it was worth, and you could buy it for about $10. So it was a great book. And he is famous for presenting the dignity of human beings. But his inspiration was largely the Old Testament. I mean, the creation story was there for everybody. I think the Jews understood it, but I think some of the Christian scholars did not view it in a humanistic fashion until Pico. And he saw the creation story where God created man in his image as elevating human beings to a very high level. And he really pushed humanism and made it started it on the road to becoming a mainstream idea. So I picked him, and as far as I know, he's a delightful human being. But he suffered, somebody poisoned him, and he died when he was 31 or so.
Someone poisoned
But
him?
very impressed. Someone poisoned him, yeah. They said he died of arson.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, it is unbelievable.
You
But
know,
he was a
in
brilliant,
looking at,
brilliant person. And
yeah, but I was commenting that you did pick people who I may have heard a name. I never heard his name, but just like Patriarch. I've heard his name, but I did not know who he was. And he was pretty attractive too. And tell me about that. Patriarch? Petrick. How do you pronounce that?
oh, Petrarch.
Patriarch.
Oh, yeah, Petrarch. He is the father of it all. He was the earliest Renaissance thinker to really realize that we had lived through a dark period. He began to identify that there were pre-Christian writers that were really excellent. And he got very excited about them. And they were almost lost to history. He would find their books in monastery libraries. Nobody was reading them, but the monasteries had just preserved certain books, and he was quite excited to recover Plato and Aristotle and Cicero, various great Roman and Greek writers that were not known, and began to realize that we had lost something in history, and he was trying to revitalize it. The tragedy or conflict in his life is how could he reconcile some of these pre-Christian writers with his Christian views. But he tried to do that, but he felt very lonely because nobody else was trying to reconcile Christianity with Plato or with other early writings. But because he did discover or rediscover humanism in a way, he is considered the father of humanism, the first known person to have studied the subject and written about it. So that's why Petrarch's included.
Right. But you know, you keep talking about their writings. Now, did they sit with a pen, one of those unusual pens, and write everything down? We didn't have printers. We had no printing presses at that time.
Yes, he was before printing presses, right? He was 40, but not too much before, maybe a couple of 100 years before.
A couple of 100 years,
Yes, people had
okay.
to write. There were scribes, but some of these people were prodigies. They could memorize things. They could memorize whole books. It was fantastic.
Really?
What their mental. Yes, right. Pico knew Dante's Divine Comedy, which is 3 volumes by heart. So they were unusual.
Wow.
Men, and yeah.
Well, and so when you,
And he,
so are any of those original documents available that you could see the beautiful handwriting of all this, or somebody put it into a
Yeah.
press after a while?
yeah, I frankly don't know that. I'm not that much of a researcher. You'd have to go to places like the British Museum to see whether
Huh.
there's any original documents. There probably aren't many, but there
Yeah.
might be a few. I don't know their
It
handwriting.
might be beautiful.
I know there was another man called Poggio who was a scribe and also a Renaissance thinker. And they said he was a very good scribe. So some of them had a good
Ah.
handwriting, but I don't
Right.
know each one of them, no.
And you know, I'm just going to poke something in here that we know today that kids are printing. They don't even know cursive writing anymore. Do you know that?
Right.
Amazing.
I heard that, but I didn't know it. Yeah, I heard they printing. Yeah.
I know that. I have no idea, but
People forget that when I went to school, we had to learn how to take the square root of something manually. I don't think that's a known talent today. I don't think some kids don't know how to do long division today. So,
no,
but they
it's
don't
true,
need
true.
to. They have a little handheld computer. It doesn't bother them. So you forget certain past
Right.
skills. They develop new skills.
Do you know that I know that? And I try, when I have a lot of numbers, I try to add them up myself. I try to keep doing that myself so I don't forget.
Yeah, I know. My father could add better than I could add, actually, because I didn't have to add as much. But he could
Right.
add a column of figures very quickly, and I can't do that.
Okay, now I'm going to talk about Frederick Douglass, because I have known about him. I don't know, I mean, I of course read your chapter on him. By the way, all these people we're talking about in this book are chapters on those people. And that's why you need to get this book. You will become so educated, and they're written up so beautifully in common language. I mean, Charles Bloch is really he's verbally articulate, but he also writes the same way. It's so interesting, and you're going to love this. You really need to do it. You will feel so informed if you get this book, and it's called Humanism, and you can get it. Well, Trimark Press is the one, but you can get it on Amazon.com. I suggest you do it. But go ahead and tell us about Frederick Douglass.
Yeah, it's hard not to include Frederick Douglass. He pops out obviously to you. He's a man who was born a slave. He testifies to the truth that if you educate people, they don't want to be slaves. And he somehow learned English from a very kindly woman who was taking care of him when he was 10 or 11 years old. She took a fancy to him, taught him English, and taught him how to read. But her husband got mad at him, at her, and told her, if you educate slaves, they want to be free. And that's what actually happened. So she stopped his education, but he continued to learn on his own. And he finally escaped. And he escaped north with the help of abolitionists, and he became a leading speaker of the abolitionist movement in the pre-slavery period in the United States. Became a famous orator. When the war started, he was a confidant of Lincoln and would advise him that he should add Negro soldiers to the Northern Army. So he was a very influential orator and person, and a very decent person humanly. He had a nice family. and a very nice wife. And he lived in Massachusetts mostly, but lectured throughout the North on abolition up to the Civil War.
And you
And
know,
even after the Civil War, he had positions.
and actually,
In,
when a lot of the Black leaders don't bring him up as they do some others, isn't that interesting? They don't. They should. Maybe they do, and
yeah,
I'm not hearing it.
maybe, well, I guess the audience doesn't know. People don't know this, so they
I
bring up
know.
someone that they're familiar with. Okay, if they studied their history, or we made more of the fact that there are great people we better not forget about. The past is important because those people worked hard for what they did, and they left us a legacy that we should be proud of. And Frederick Douglass ranks very high.
And
So
Charles
I,
Block, you fell in love with these people. I know that they're like your friends, aren't they?
that's correct. You feel for them. You know their life. You know their struggle.
Right.
Frederick Douglass is one of his famous quotes is "There's no progress without struggle," and that really typifies all those people. And it was important not to know just that humanism affected world history, but who were the ones that were the heroes that really did it. It wasn't some of the great leaders of the past. It was these thinkers and writers whose ideas finally infected all of us so that we couldn't resist it anymore. And it's that sense that I present them as the heroes, the who of the humanistic history.
You know, when I was thinking about Black Lives Matter, wherever he is today, wherever he is, where he lies, where he is, Frederick must be with a big smile on his face because Black Lives Matter was what he was all about.
Yes, it was. It was. And he was a great guy. I mean, there were abolitionists like who we worked with that wanted to burn the Constitution. But he said no. He said we could work through it. And he had a good common sense head on his shoulders. And he knew how to forward his ideas and not alienate people who didn't necessarily buy into him. So he's a very convincing man, which was important.
Well, I'm going to ask you a strange question about this. So we find all these people, someone like that who was not properly educated as you were, and yet they had this. Where does that all come from, Charles, in your mind?
Where's what come from? Their drive, their
what he believed and how he was able to do this without an education. How was he able to do that?
Oh, that's a good question, but I don't think I know the answer. They have some motivation.
Right, I don't.
Right. He just wanted to be free, and he tried to escape 2 or 3 times, and he didn't do it, but he kept trying, and finally he was successful.
Right.
And I think people are driven. Gandhi was driven. He just was motivated beyond belief. Gandhi was a man of some polish. He was an educated lawyer. He wore a 3-piece suit. But
I didn't know that. I should have. Yeah, I remember now as I remember reading that. I mean, how did he become all that stuff?
When he decided he had to fight for the poor people, he decided to dress like the poor people. And so he identified so deeply with the people he wanted to help. And so didn't each of them try to identify with those they wanted to help. Mary Wollstonecraft, that's what they had in common. They identified with people they wanted to help. And that they were driven people.
Yes.
A lot of fire in their belly.
Right, fire in their belly. So Charles Block, the book Humanism. Now that you've done such a masterpiece of a book, are you thinking of another one, of something? You've got to. You're just like a kid inside, even though we know you're 90. But
yeah,
we only have 2 minutes for you to answer that big question.
My focus is to market this book now, which will take a lot of energy. And then when that passes, I will give some consideration to other things.
Okay. Well, I'll do everything in my power also to push it. It's so wonderful. Well, I want to thank you so much, and I do look forward to, pleased to tell, I will definitely get down there, and we'll get together, because you're a treasure. Both of you are treasures. It's a beautiful love story too. We'll have to save that for another time. But thank you, Charles, very much for being with us today, and have a very happy holiday and be safe.
Thank you, Anita. Thank you very much.
You're
Okay,
welcome. Bye, everybody. We'll do our next interview, and just stay with us.